Okay, Matt.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this Lunch and Learn today. This Lunch and Learn is based on an article that was published in this month's magazine of Compliance Today. It's run by the HCCA, Healthcare Compliance Association. So I was fortunate enough to have it published. I worked on it a couple of months ago and had to submit it. So the title of the article, as you can see on the screen, the PowerPoint, is Defensible Documentation and Offensive Strategy. So I picked that as kind of a catchy title because when we think of documenting, we always hear the words defensible. What does defensible documentation mean? And I thought, really, even though it should be defensible or defendable, however you want to think about it, you need to really be, sort of offensive, have an offensive strategy with your documentation, meaning, you should understand what it really means to, document defensively. So that way that your documentation will kind of go to bat for you when you need it. So next slide is going to be an icebreaker. So I'm just going to open this up to everyone on the meeting today. So anyone can feel free to unmute and answer. So somebody, what do you consider as defensible documentation? Just anybody can answer. How would you define that?
Documentation that is going to be detailed and specific to be able to cover you and give a story to maybe someone who needs it later.
Perfect. Tell a story. That's a good answer. Anybody else? All right, that was actually a really good answer. That's pretty close to the actual answer. So we'll leave it that one. So let's go to the next one. So can somebody give me 3 reasons why we document our patient interactions? So why do we write this stuff down? 3 reasons.
Well, one could be just to let the next therapist know or next treater know how they did last time, how they responded, and how to progress them.
Perfect. Need 2 more. Anybody chime in?
So we remember what took place.
Yep, good. Just creates a record, right? Just so, hey, this is what happened. All right, somebody give me 1 more reason. Why do we document?
Justify your charges for reimbursement.
Excellent. Perfect, Eric. Very good. All right, now the last one, this one could be a little bit challenging. So in an allegation of negligence or malpractice, right? So negligence, just as a legal review, means that as a treater or a therapist that you have a duty to your patient. There's 4 elements of negligence. You have a duty, that you breached that duty, that what you did or didn't do was cause or causation, and then there were damages. Okay, so the person you're working with got hurt. So all 4 of those elements have to be there for negligence. And then malpractice is simply just that, right? What you did, we can compare that to, say, the Practice Act, right? Or state regulations. You went outside of the rule or outside, out of bounds. So in an allegation of either of those or both, what happens if you leave out a patient's complaint of new symptoms or an injury? So what do you think could happen then? No wrong answers. All right, we'll leave that one. Nobody wants to bite on that one. Okay, so objectives for today for the Lunch and Learn. So this is just basically an outline, right? So first, we're going to define defensible documentation, just clarify it for people that may be not quite sure. We're going to list reasons why it is important to document all patient interactions. We're going to contrast your regular or your daily notes versus an incident report. We're going to review a hypothetical case. Just included a relevant quote from Damian Conway that was in the article that I liked. And then the article discussion, this is going to be in subtopics. So a good defense prepares a good offense. Think short story, not novel. Less is not more. Of course, similar to location, real estate, update your documentation. I'm going to review what's called a CMS CERT task force. Some of you may or may not be aware of. Just one of the last sections called Amat Victoria Karam, and then takeaways. And at the end of that, if you hold your general questions for the end, we'll do about 10, 15 minutes at the end to address those. And there is just a picture of the PowerPoint of the article. And Starla has sent out, believe she sent an update and sent out the article to everybody if some of you pre-read it. So defensible documentation defined. So I took this from WebPT. I love WebPT. It's just a general resource. And in this, at the bottom of the reference, you can see in this blog, they defined it pretty accurately, very similar to what was just said earlier. So defensible documentation, it's documentation that not only clearly demonstrates the patient's story, i.e. the results of a complete assessment and the patient's medical history, but also proves that the services provided were medically necessary and that the patient's condition warranted your skilled intervention. So there again, just in a nutshell, that's what your documentation should quantify. All right, so why document? So there's a lot of reasons. Some were already stated earlier, the three. So just these are some extra ones that again was taken from the same blog. So it serves as the patient's care record, and it includes information detailing the patient's functional status, how his or her care is being managed, and the expected treatment outcome. It's a tool providers can use to plan for care provision and share important patient information with other members of the patient's care team, which is stated. It's a vehicle for communicating the provider's abilities, expertise, and services. And I kind of want to expound on that too. It also, the expertise, services, your abilities, it's also displaying, right, your approach, your treatment approach. So as we look at your documentation, let's say you're OCS, right, and you're an orthopedic specialist. Well, you're probably, I've been through the OCS course, it's not certified. You're probably going to use some of their recommended language. So when we see that you're OCS, we're like, yeah, this person has a little more expertise, in orthopedics because, well, they've been through the certification course and they're documenting maybe at a little bit higher level than some, let's say, compared to an entry-level DPT. It's a way to demonstrate compliance with all regulations, federal, state, and payers. So again, we have to document and submit to get paid, as Eric said. It serves a historical account of interactions between the provider and the patient that the provider can present as evidence if there's ever a legal situation. So again, that kind of likened to that last scenario. So you want to be very thorough. If patients are, coming in saying they're 10 out of 10 pain, but then bragging, earlier that morning they went and played a full court, game of basketball, probably want to put that in your note. Doesn't really quite match up there unless they had an acute injury playing basketball. So things like that, you always want to put in there because it creates doubt to what you're being told. It proves that medically necessary services were provided, thereby making it appropriate for the provider to request reimbursement from third-party payers. And it can provide useful data to support policy and research initiatives. So Dr. V, Joe Vernon is very involved with this. So we will use elements from documentation, not specifically, but just, randomized for doing research, right? For developing, new outcome systems and outcome measures. And we do, sort of demographical studies. There's a lot of, there's a lot of focus on treating the back, right? Dr. V has been very passionate about this, from MedX to doing the staging, to some of the research that he just sent out recently. That used to be that, let's immobilize, let's not move the back, let's wait till it calms down. But then all the research is pointing to the opposite, right? We need to strengthen, because new research says that, you're getting, you're getting muscle wasting, like in the multifidi, which would make sense physiologically, right? You're not using the muscles, they're a major spine stabilizer. That turns into being a pain driver. So things like that we use, because we can say, well, hey, this person was treated with a very, aggressive back strengthening program. There was no contraindications. They did great. Well, this person, basically was immobilized and had to wear a thoracolumbar, soft brace and had weak core. So things like that is why your documentation can be used. So daily note versus incident reports. So a lot of you do a great job with differentiating these, what to do, what not to do. So your daily note basically includes regular treatment information. You want to discuss the response from previous and current treatments, provide rationale for continuing care with that patient, and you want to justify changes such as intensity and exercise. So again, your daily note specifically tied to just what you're doing with that patient in the clinic. Now, incident reports, and sometimes this can be confused, is that's completed for any patient complaint or injury. So let's say you get a patient and they have a fall, either from the parking lot or they fall getting off the bike or treadmill. That does not go in your daily note. You want to put that in the incident report. That is not part of your regular documentation. So that information, it says not included, and this may be used in future litigation. So that is why we tell you not to put it in the daily note. It's not that you're hiding the incident. It's the fact that we record that because it could be a potential legal threat against you and or us as a company. So we're allowed to put that under attorney-client privilege, meaning it's not discoverable. What that means is that if we were to get a legal threat, that can be disclosed to our insurance company and then the attending attorney that's handling that. But we don't have to release that to the patient or to the other side, right? That's our in-house notes. That's our documentation of what happened. That's not considered something that would be outside of the medical record. Now, if you took your incident report, copy and pasted it and put it in a daily note, guess what? It's now discoverable. So anything that you quoted, your opinion on it, is now going to be able to be examined, right, by the litigant or your patient or that attorney. So that's why we tell you to keep it separate. We don't have to disclose those. So here's a hypothetical, and this is kind of going into the article, something I included. So hypothetical, it's peak season for your clinic and you have back-to-back patients. We've all been there. You are having difficulty keeping up with your notes. So today you receive a legal threat from a large malpractice law firm in the area. It names you as sole defendant regarding a patient that you treated about 9 months ago. Now it alleges negligence, so what we talked about the 4 elements before, and they're saying that your negligence resulted in a subsequent cervical surgery for the patient. Now you review the case in your lunch break, because again, you're really busy. You're like, it's not a big deal. But you notice that your notes are very repetitive, which means they all look the same every 3, 4, 5, you're busy. So you don't really change the subjective. Every time they're coming in, it's 5 out of 10. Words aren't changed. Exercises aren't changed. Even though you're like, I know I progressed that patient. I know we weren't doing yellow TheraBand, the 3rd week, but that's what the note says. So then you check even further, there's no updated objective measures. So basically for the first 4 weeks, you didn't change MMT, you didn't change their, ADL function, nothing. No assessment of medical necessity. So nowhere in your notes did you really defend what you were doing and saying, I knew they were getting better. They were talking about they were able to address better. Didn't really talk about any increased neck pain that I remember, but you didn't really put that in your notes. And then there's no discharge note. So towards the end, you kind of remember them just falling off. They had a couple of cancellations, a no-show. You were busy. You didn't call them to check up on them. They just kind of fell off. So that's the hypothetical. So with that hypothetical, kind of going back to it, things like this happen. This is the reason why I put this in there. This is why you want to have good documentation. You don't have to over document, which we'll discuss in a little bit, but you want to have adequate documentation. You need to be changing the actual verbiage in your notes. You need to be changing your pain rating should be different most days, unless that person just loves 5 out of 10, right? We've all had them. But your assessments need to change. The objectives, I know me clinically in practice, I would try to change and update my objectives. Sometimes every week, depending, I could get a range of motion measure for total knee replacement, 5 seconds, right? And it was just fun to track for the patient. Other things that are like chronic pain, they're not going to change as often. So that time frame to update your progress notes and objectives is 2 to 4 weeks. Well, what does that do? So just like here, if you've got updated measures and you're showing progress and you're not showing any new acute injury, you're not committing any malpractice with what you're doing, everything you're treating would be within that stage of condition or healing for that patient, then you're covered, right? Your documentation, congratulations, is now defensible, right? It's defending what you're doing. So the quote that I used, documentation is a love letter that you write to your future self. So again, when you think about it, spend a lot of time, right? Relationships are, the number one commodity is time, right? You put a lot of time into a relationship, you're going to get a lot out. Same thing with your documentation. If you put a lot of time into your documentation, you're very thorough. When you need it someday, we all hope we don't, but when you need it, it's going to be there, and you're going to be very thankful because you're going to sleep at night. You're not going to worry because you got proof that what you did was not negligent. There was no malpractice. You did your job effectively. So kind of starting in deeper into the article. So first subtopic is just called a good defense prepares a good offense. So what does that mean? Well, your documentation should defend what you do. So whatever you write down should paint that story, right? It should show that what you're doing is medically necessary, that you're billing correctly. All of those elements of what we do is, PTs, OTs, PTAs, CODAs. It should convey your thoughts based on all given medical information, right? So if I'm an external auditor, which I will be for some of you and starting in the next quarter, if I look at the medical case, right, with my own clinical knowledge or legal knowledge or whatnot, if I look at it like, you know what Eric did, that seems, pretty reasonable, right? Maybe I might have done this exercise instead of that, but the outcome's probably going to be the same, right? Nothing crazy, right? Like you're not bringing a shoulder patient in, and now all of a sudden we're working on the knee, and there was no diagnosis for the knee, nothing on the referral. It wasn't converted to direct access. That would make you kind of scratch your head. So it would go, your documentation would go on the offense if you were audited or served with a legal threat. So what that means is you want to document, not out of fear or paranoia, okay, but you want to document believing that that patient someday could turn around and sue you. That if you don't fix their chronic pain, they go and get a surgery, then they turn around and say, you know what, PT, everything I read out there in the blogs, it says PT is supposed to fix this. Well, we all know on the call that's not true. Some of these things can just be chronic arthritis. It could be, herniations. It could be meniscal tears. It could be things that even imaging doesn't pick up on, that only a surgeon would find when they make the first cut. So, but again, they may still come back and blame you because, I spent 3 months, working with Nick or with Chris, and they just kept saying I was doing good, and then I ended up in surgery because the pain just came right back when I quit. So this is interesting. So in a 2021 review of medical malpractice claims, 4% were related to, quote, poor documentation of patient instruction and education. So that's going to be related back to what? Gotta document. 4% may not seem like a lot in legal cases, but actually that's high. Because so 4 out of every 100 cases that are brought, they focus directly on poor documentation. So when that's something that is in your control, right, just to spend a few extra minutes a day to make sure your documentation is sound, you now remove yourself out of that 4%. So the last thing would be to treat every patient like they are your best friend, your spouse, mother, father, another therapist, a medical doctor, attorney, and an insurance auditor. So what does that mean? I got that from Dr. Lisa Chase, and I was going through school at St. Augustine in Florida. And it basically says, right, don't try to trick anyone. You're treating every patient like they know as much or more than you. Treat them like their family. Well, some of you may not want to treat them like their family if you'd be a little too honest with them. But it basically is just that, right? You are just putting in there what needs to be there, right? You're not hiding anything. If they have an increase in symptoms that day, put it down. It doesn't mean you caused it, right? If they were consistently at a 2, now they're at an 8. Well, obviously, if they stay at an 8, we need to get them to follow up back with the doctor because maybe there's some new symptoms. But again, you just put in there, what's supposed to go in the note. So the next section in the article that I kind of focused on was called Think Short Story, Not Novel. So again, there's always, sometimes you see extremes and outliers of documentation. Either, one end, people don't write enough, right? Or some people write too much, right? Be careful of putting a lot of your own subjective information in there, like excessive medical opinions, and an example that would be like, you got a patient coming in, and this has happened before, not with this company, but in practice, I've seen it. Patient has a meniscus repair, right? They come from a doctor, that's, kind of iffy on their outcomes. And you're working with a patient and their swelling is still really bad. This is day 10, the swelling should be going down. They got really bad bruising. And then, you tell the patient and you document it. It's like, what? I think, that surgeon's not that good. I don't think they fixed it. I think something's wrong. Right. So now indirectly, you're not only telling the patient, but you're documenting you think that surgeon committed malpractice or, had a faulty surgery, and it's in your notes. So that opens you up to a cross claim from that surgeon. Let's say your patient goes and sues and then tells the doctor, well, my therapist said you messed it up. He said he's never seen a knee this bad, 10 days out of surgery. Well, yeah, absolutely. You can get sued for that because now you defamed the surgeon. The surgeon's got documentation, right, of the surgery. Nothing seen, third party would audit that. So now you get in a legal fight with a surgeon. Again, you just want to be careful what you put in your notes. So again, like I said before, it tells a story of your interactions and decisions to the reader. So again, stick to the facts, right? Be objective. Be careful about putting opinion. You can say that the symptoms are uncharacteristic, based on the patient diagnosis, referred back to MD for further testing. Using a line like that, we all know what that says. It says that, hey, not really sure what's going on. Patient could have injured themselves and didn't tell you. Surgery may not have gone well. But again, you're not exposing yourself to any kind of legal threat from another provider. So just want to keep it very sort of sheepish, as we like to say. You don't want to get aggressive in your notes. Any real or perceived change in a patient's condition should be noted. So again, it goes to that. You even if they say they've got increased DOMS or soreness from the exercises from their HEP, right? Put it down. Again, the more you put down in there, the more it's going to defend what you do. Because let's say you get a legal threat, and this has happened within the past year. Patient reached out. It was a litigation claim, and patient reached out to the attorney. The attorney had a good relationship with the clinic director. They started, kind of going back and forth, and the attorney, I could tell, being a third party, that there was some lawyering going on. They were trying to befriend the therapist, and I can tell you, unless they're your GC or in-house counsel, attorneys are not your friends. They are not. They are purely fact finders. They will play games. They will role play with you. They want to get a friendship with you so that they can get the information, because they know once you drop your guard, you'll tell them whatever they want to know. But anyway, long story short, patient just got a little sore, claimed some ankle stuff was going on. None of it was justified. Eventually, I intervened and got it kind of discharged because there was some different stories being told on both sides. But anyway, that's where, again, put it down, but don't put things in there, again, that didn't happen. That's where, again, your notes are going to defend you. And then finally, you're going to include functional progress such as dressing, ADLs, and ambulation distance. Again, this is a huge focus this year. Dr. V's been working with it. Rick Katz, I know you've heard it from me. One of the hardest things for us to do is to take that extra second, right, and put down function, right? If got a total knee patient and they're on a rolling walker, every 2 weeks or a month, if they downgrade their assisted device, put it in there. Say, hey, in the assessment, patient's doing really well, now ambulating, 500-foot bouts with, SPC, single point cane instead of rolling walker, as functional progress. That is huge. That one statement, believe it or not only covers everything you've done since the eval, but it also is medical necessity because it's showing that, hey, we're working on function here, This is just another good quote that's used in the article. So I found this article from Dr. Thomas Guthiel. And so according to him, there's two major pitfalls involving medical documentation. Any attempt to alter any documentation, which again, we can't really do that because with Raintree, EMR is timestamped and the changes are recorded. And strive to maintain a professional tone while excluding irrelevant or harmful information such as jokes or incident reports. So again, kind of already alluded to that, right? You don't want to include anything that could be harmful, both to yourself, to the patient, any just emotional thoughts or things like your own opinion about how the surgery really went. Again, stay objective with your reporting, because that you can defend. Stuff that becomes subjective or accusations, those you can't defend. That's when you tend to get in trouble. So the next section, I went into less is not more. So in practice, and even in my own practice, there's an overall lack of personalized reporting that is prevalent. So what does personalized reporting mean? Well, that means including statements that are first person, rooted in your own objectivity and assessment, and that provide updates. So again, the click boxes on Raintree, patient tolerated treatment well, and that'd be your assessment. That is just not adequate enough. If you get a legal threat or insurance auditors see that, I'm telling you, they are salivating, because they just laugh. They're like, oh, look at this, we got a box checker therapist, they're not writing anything. When you don't personalize your assessments and you don't personalize your notes, that is just opening you up, to possible litigation if somebody accuses you of wrongdoing, but it also, it opens you up to another important thing, and that's, denial of payment, right? You're not going to get reimbursement if you don't, personalize your reporting, because again, think of it as like a game, right? Think about documenting and treating patients like a game of chess. Both sides, right? Both sides have little armies, right? You got pawns, you got king, queen, you got knights, rooks. At the end of the day, both sides are trying to win, right? Insurance companies, attorneys, their clients are going to be the patients. We're the treaters, we're the providers, we're the fixers, right? We've got bills also. We earn salaries, we got to pay for our clinics, we've got to pay for future renovations and trainings and things. I mean, so again, it's a little bit of it's a game. So if we do our job on our side and we move our pieces forward in a smart way, well, then they're not going to be able to attack, right? But if you don't ever move your pawns out away from the firing line, so to speak, trust me, they're coming across to your side. They are going to check. Auditors are going to pull your notes. You're going to receive legal threats if you practice long enough. That is why you want to have personalized reporting, because that really starts taking their pieces off the board, because I guarantee you that is the first thing they look for. Can they discredit you, right? They will attack you and your practice as a therapist. And again, like I said, the infamous patient tolerated treatment well, right? That's just not going to cut it. You got to write more. So you want to think of your eval and treatment notes like your patients, living and breathing, right? That document, you could consider that a living document. When you're treating a patient, it should be alive, right? It should always be changing. It should be dynamic. It should look different every time. It should move, it should move forward as your patient moves forward. Shouldn't be looking in notes and seeing that you're still recording, 1 pound hand weights for empty can exercises, but you're at week 10, you're about to discharge the patient. They're basically on machines and they're up to 5 pounds, but your documentation says 1. That's a big problem. Even though you got the patient better, an insurance auditor, attorney, myself, Dr. V, when we see that, it's hard to believe. We're just going, man, for 8 weeks, this person did 1 pound, but even though they didn't, and you just forgot to change that one little box, in your exercise section in Raintree, still, that's part of, your responsibility to make sure those things are getting updated. And then the last thing, your documentation should be a mirror of your patient's current condition and only contain substantive information. This kind of points back to the last section. So what does substantive mean? That means things that are substantially related. Okay, so again, not just your own prose or your own opinion. This is stuff that should be strictly related to treatment, related to their performance of ADLs outside of the clinic, progress. It could also be, you could also put in there some barriers, right? That's all relative. That's substantive. Barriers to treatment. Let's say the patient's only, that they have to use public transportation or get a ride to the clinic, and they can only make it twice a week or once a week sometimes, and they're a post-op shoulder patient, large rotator cuff repair. That's a barrier. You want to put that in your notes, because again, even though we can't directly help with that, that is a barrier that will impact their care so that they don't progress like, say, you would expect them to. Then you've got a reason why. So, and then the last section is update. So I picked that as, it's very similar to real estate, right? You can have the most beautiful home and have all the amenities, but if it's in a horrible location and all the comps around you are 100,000, you buy $1 million home, guess what? Your house is probably not worth $1 million. Same thing with your documentation, right? If we can compare your documentation to 10 of your colleagues, right? Or even other people in your clinic, and it all looks about the same, you're all documenting and updating. Well, guess what? That's your quote comps, right? That's your comparables, right? Everybody, because you guys do a great job, some of the clinics training and having your, monthly meetings. Some of you meet weekly and round on your patients at the larger clinics, which is great. But again, you're kind of compared against your colleagues. Now, if we take your documentation and compare it against everybody else and it's lacking, right? It's doing the minimum, it's leaving out stuff, nothing is getting changed, that's going to make you an outlier, right? When you come up on audits, both your peer-to-peer and then myself or Dr. V look at them. If we see patterns like that, we're going to humbly reach out and say, hey, we need to discuss this, because again, at the end of the day, we want to be resources and serve all of you. But at the end of the day too, we also want to make sure that as a company, that what you're doing, that, we get paid, so that you get paid, so that your clinic is viable, so that we can thrive as a business. So having a daisy chain, as we call it, of identical notes with no updates or changes, questions of validity. So there again, like I talked about before, if I'm a third party and I'm trying to discredit you, that's what I want to see. I want to see notes that were not changed. I want to see the same thing in assessment or nothing at all, or a checkbox. Because again, when I start questioning you on your care of that patient, you're not going to really have the answers, especially if it's 6, 9 months, a year and a half down the road. Statute of limitations on a lot of claims is 2 years. So you may not hear from a patient for 18 months, and then you get served with a legal threat. You're not going to remember. You may remember a little bit because you spent 12 weeks with them, but you're not going to remember specifics, things that were said. You're not going to remember that time where, they said that a week out of shoulder surgery, they try to put a gallon of milk up, on the top shelf, and then their shoulder hurt for 3 days after. Stuff like that you want to put in your notes, okay? Because that's something that would be considered. Recurring, same or exact treatments and times are impossible. So you want to avoid estimating and be exact. Now, there could be some disagreement with this and pushback. So I know that some people are comfortable with estimating times, right? Patient treatment times, we see 3 to 4 p.m., right? Every time, their appointments at 3 to 4, we just round it off and estimate, bill 4 units, whatever, it's PPO. They pay us contract rates anyway. I've heard all the different, justifications, but I want you to think about something. If that's if your note, right, if your note is a representation of you and that patient's attendance in your clinic and at their visit, you want every element of that note to be correct and exact, right? Now, this is not being OCD. I want you to hear me out. So if the patient comes late every day, 3:05 or 3:10, right? But you just put 3, okay? Number one, now your treatment time is 10 minutes off. And let's say they demand they have to leave at 4 because they got to get to school. They take night classes. Well, that, believe it or not, even though it's a small element, that is a huge element on the back end if you get served a legal threat or you're audited. So putting the exact time down and putting the exact exercises down is very, very important, because again, that is going to give you credibility as a practitioner. The more specific you are, then that is going to raise the validity of not only your notes, but also just the way you practice. So something to think about. And also, just to lend to Eric's point, that also increases the validity of your billing, right? Some insurances now are starting to challenge these times that are rounded. They will audit you. If they do a general pull of notes and they see that you're rounding everything, they know that's impossible. They know your patient does not come every day at exactly 3 o'clock and leave at exactly 4 o'clock, right? So they're starting to challenge that now, even though they might be on a contract rate. Some of our contracts have stipulations where you get paid up to a certain amount, and then if you go over like 5 units, they'll give you a little bit more, right? If they're a post-op patient, but within a certain, treatment time or amount, you're going to get paid the same. But again, if you don't document properly the times, you can't defend, getting that extra bit of money that they owe you, right? You treated these patients. And then finally, the peer-to-peer and quarterly chart audits improve quality. So a lot of you are very good about doing that already. We've rolled this out. I'm going to hold everybody accountable to this because it is very, very important. All of your successful rehab companies do this. We're not doing this as a means to like finger point and be like, I caught Hillary, she's not doing her notes right, or she's really busy and she's just not. No, look, work with each other, right? It's to help each other out, it's to sharpen each other. That way, when we do the quarterly audits, we're not zeroing in on a random mistake, right? A misspelled word. Maybe in this one patient, you forgot the HEP, but you didn't scan it in, but you handed it to the person. These things are very important because what we want to see quarterly, even annually, is that you improve your documentation, is that you do pay a little more attention to updating your objective. Let's say now you're updating only, you're only updating pain once a week, let's say on every Friday, that's your pain day. And then, you're only putting HEPs in for your post-op patients, but not your chronic patients because it's too much work, to drop it off and get it scanned or click and save. But then let's say, a couple of quarters later, and after, getting all these amazing talks about defensible documentation, like, what, I can see Matt's point, I probably need to try to get that in as many charts as I can, and be defensible, right? Have as much information as possible. Well, then we look, a couple of quarters later and you're doing it. Well, number one, that could transfer over to your, performance reviews. So, because if we see it, your CDs see it, and if you're a CD, your RD sees it, right? So that shows that you're striving to be a better therapist and a better team player. And those things, turn into dollars, right? It turns into progress for you professionally and in your careers. So the CMS CERT Task Force, I'm not sure if some of you've heard about this, got a quick little 5-minute video that discusses it a little bit more that we're going to watch. So according to the CMS Comprehensive Error Rate Testing, the CERT program, the following are insufficient documentation errors identified in the January 2021 fact sheet. So first of all, big one, incomplete progress notes. We got to have complete progress notes. You got to have your objective updated. Plan of care needs to be updated. Unauthenticated medical records, no provider signature or wrong provider. These rarely happen now. It was happening more when the migration from clinician over to Raintree happened. I know some of you are probably aware of that. Not happening so much now because Raintree, there's so many checks and balances there. You've got to have all that stuff entered before you can even open a case. Incomplete or missing signed orders and notes. So what that means obviously is like, let's say, all these patients from Dr. A, you're not getting any of your plan of care signed. Now, we're asked to make 3 attempts on plan of cares. We've dealt with this with a couple of offices, and again, that's fine. If you make 3 attempts, you fax it, we call twice or send an email, technically we're covered, right? You made 3 attempts to get that plan of care signed, and that's it. You're actually covered by that because that's called a reasonable standard. That's been cleared by both Rick Katz, Medicare observes that, and we're doctors of physical therapy, for those of you on the call. So if you're a DPT, they're like, well, you're a doctor in your field. Really, at this point, the laws are trying to change to give us full autonomy. I mean, why are we getting MDs? Why do they need to sign off on our plan of care when we're specialists? We don't have to sign off on their surgical notes. So it doesn't really make much sense. I'm an advocate to just cutting that, rule out. But, as it has to do with control and lobbying and insurance. So, but yeah, 3 attempts have to be made on the plan of cares. Incomplete or missing, incomplete, missing non-associated orders, and then documentation did not support certification of plan of care. So there again, that comes down to, if let's say it points back to the progress notes or a reeval, if you don't justify them, they're either in your assessment or updated objectives, you just carry them forward. If you don't have some kind of change identified, and then you're saying, hey, this person needs 12 more visits, it's going to get challenged. Insurance, your work comp, all is not going to go through. So this applies to all payers, whether it's work comp, whether it's PI, whether it's, PPOs, Medicare, CMS, state Medicaid. All right, bear with me. I'm going to try to get this video to start. Let's see if we can bring it up. Okay. Just 1 second. Okay, first, just a sound check. Can all of you hear that on the call? Can you hear volume there?
No, we can't, Matt.
Yeah, okay.
When you share, make sure you just check the box that says share sound.
Yeah, let me go back here. 1 second. The videos are tough. Can you see the video, or can you see it on the screen though?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, you can see it, great. Just need to figure out how to share it. I think I can do it over here. Let's see. Video. Starla, you said share sound. How do you do that?
Yeah, if you stop sharing for a second and then reshare, in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a checkbox that says share sound.
Got it. I see it. Thank you so much.
And I can pull up the video too if you need me to, if you're having trouble.
Can you see it now? Is it back on?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. And I'm gonna restart it. Should be able to work.
You can hear it.
Hi, I'm Angela at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. As a healthcare professional, your goal is to provide the best patient care possible. You document on a daily basis, but do you think about how your documentation fits into patient care and claims payment? Proper documentation of items or services is the primary communication tool for promoting quality patient care. Documentation is the vehicle that communicates who, what, when, why, and how to other patient caregivers. Proper documentation is important for a number of reasons. First, it ensures that patients get items or services that are reasonable and necessary. Next, proper documentation supports proper claim payment. When you completely and accurately document the items you furnished or the services that you provided, Medicare can process your claims for those items or services correctly the first time. Proper documentation also helps support favorable medical review decisions, and in turn, it reduces the administrative costs that are associated with appeals. Even though we know that proper documentation is important, the Comprehensive Error Rate Testing, or CERT program, continually finds that the leading cause of claims errors is insufficient documentation. So what is insufficient documentation? To understand what insufficient documentation is, let's start with what it isn't. Insufficient documentation doesn't mean documentation doesn't exist. It means that something was incomplete or missing from the documentation submitted with the claim. Now that we've discussed the benefits of proper documentation and we understand what insufficient documentation is, let's take a look at what happens when you don't provide proper documentation. When your claims are denied, your practice or facility loses revenue. Take a moment to consider the cost to your practice or facility because of claim denials. Appealing claim denials can be costly. The time and costs associated with resubmitting a claim, from completing forms, submitting documentation, and sometimes sending a letter about why you believe the claim should be paid, all cost time and money. Proper documentation is a sound way to protect the financial health and sustainability of your facility or practice and your medical peers. Ensuring that your documentation reflects the medical necessity of the items you furnish or the services you provide, and correctly coding your claims will help reduce denials and reduce overpayments. Even more importantly, proper documentation is critical to proper and comprehensive patient care. Think of it this way. If an order is illegible, a patient could get the wrong medication, test, item, or service. Patient care errors and financial consequences can significantly impact your facility or practice. And that's why it's important to respond to documentation requests from the CERT program, clinics, facilities, laboratories, durable medical equipment suppliers, and other physicians. Your documentation may support a related claim review. Here are some tips to help you if you need to respond to a request for records from the CERT program. First, make sure you send all associated documentation supporting the item or service you billed. Keep in mind, some of that information may come from a prior encounter or a test performed earlier than the date of service for the claim under review. If you're not sure if you should include the document, it's a good idea to include it anyway. It might be the key document or information that supports the item you furnished or the service you provided. Next, Make sure you send the documentation by the deadline in the request. And then the last step is to review your documentation. A good way to double check is to make sure that it answers the questions who, what, when, why, and how. Even the most comprehensive documentation must not only verify that each item or service billed was performed, but it also must verify the medical necessity for each and every item or service billed. Your Medicare Administrative Contractor, or your MAC, can help you understand the documentation requirements, such as the signature requirements. To get more information, you can visit your MAC's website. To review more information on Medicare's documentation requirements, you can review the Medicare Learning Network, or MLN, fact sheet that's called Complying with Medical Record Documentation Requirements. And for more information on Medicare's signature requirements, review the MLN fact sheet that's called Complying with Medicare Signature Requirements. Finally, the CERT AB MAC Outreach and Education page on cms.gov has more information to help you.
All right. Can everyone hear me again? Back on? PowerPoint good? All right.
Yep.
So I thought that video was helpful because it just, that's CMS generated. And again, they're trying to be transparent and let you guys know, just, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what needs to be in the documentation. This is why. This is how you get paid. All right. And then the last thing, it's Amat Victoria Coram. So that is Latin for victory loves preparation. So you may have heard that in movies before, but it is true. If you document properly, right, that is your preparation for victory in the future. Helps you get paid, helps defend what you do. If you get audited or get a legal threat. So in this, I kind of came up with this perspective. So you want to strive to have foresight in your documentation, which will help you avoid having hindsight regrets. So again, on the front end, if you really work and strive to, have good documentation, then when something happens in the future, you're not going to look back and be like, man, I wish I'd just written more. I wish I'd taken an extra minute to do that. And again, no two notes, just to hammer this home, no two notes should ever read the same. When we start seeing that daisy chain of notes, that's kind of a yellow to a red flag, right? It just looks like, okay, you're too busy, just clicking, opening the note, signing it, not changing anything. That's going to start to, again, attack your validity and credibility. And then finally, having defensible documentation provides you with a defense that you are fully engaged during each patient encounter and documenting appropriate patient responses to treatment. So again, that is going to be why it's defensible, right? It's going to defend everything that you do. You're fully engaged, you're present, you're changing pain ratings, you're getting a subjective report, you're updating objectives, between 1 and 4 weeks. And at each encounter, there's something is being changed on that documentation or updated. So I just copy and pasted these from the article. So these are just some key takeaways at the very end, where thorough defensible documentation can serve as a, quote, love letter to yourself in the future and serve as protection. You should view and complete every piece of medical documentation as if it will be reviewed by a regulator and or interested party, regardless of your industry. So that goes back to the mother, father, lawyer, auditor, all that, that analogy. The tone of your documentation should always be professional, unbiased, and tell a short story of each patient interaction. Again, short story, not novel, right? You don't want to write too much, don't want to include stuff in there that's not substantial, like we discussed. Medical documentation should be viewed as having a humanistic quality. So that is a living, breathing document that should mirror your patient's condition. Again, it should always be changing. It should be very fluid. It should follow your patient. Again, it's going to mirror, what they're doing in your clinic. And then finally, so you're going to strive to think ahead and document with a focus on being prepared for anything that you may need to reference in the future or to avert any legal challenges. Now, again, the beauty of working in rehab, we have very low legal exposure, right? We're not, invasive surgery. We're not dealing, with opening up, and doing brain surgeries here, things like that, where a lot of things could go wrong either in the short term or the long term. We're minimally to non-invasive. So again, our legal threats are very low, but they are still there. You don't ever want to get complacent just because you haven't, been served a legal threat either in your career or, oh, it's been years since I've gotten one and that one didn't go anywhere. So I'm just going to, document. However, the moment you get complacent and relaxed and lazy is the moment something is going to happen and it's going to become a headache for you. I've seen this before involved in people's careers. So you just, it's that thing, right? Was it I think Rock has a moniker, no days off, right? Or, one of the pro athletes, JJ Watts, I think, that you hear that, but they're right. When we're being, as a professional, you need to be consistent. You can't get lazy. You can't assume that, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. I can't improve. We can all improve all the time. Every one of us can improve on our practice. All right. Well, thank you all for sitting through that. I tried to keep it somewhat engaging. So I'm just going to open it up for a few minutes. I know some of you are getting back to training at 1 o'clock. Does anybody have any specific questions about documentation of the presentation today? Any at all? And just like in the past with these, meetings, if you have an afterthought, you can always email me or call if you have something that's, relevant to patient case or something like that. Starla, I'm going to give it back to you. I think we don't have any questions. I don't see any in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And if anyone wants to review that article, I did send it to everyone, so you should have the hard copy of that as well. And just one last thing, I just want to make sure that I have everyone. I'm going to read the list of people that I have. If you're on this call and I didn't read your name, please put your name in the chat. So I have David, Shelby, Norma, Sharon, Juden, Max Monroe, Brian Carson, Samantha, Brett Lingelbach, Stephen Hare, Matt Luongo, sorry if I said your name wrong, Eric, Lori, Melissa, Nicole Visor, Sarah Hare, Orion, Chris Wolfinger, Stephanie, Nick Magnuson, Richard Miller, Rob Asuncion, sorry again if I said that wrong, Trent, I think it's Trent Deekers, if not, correct me please, and then Monica. So if Matt Langworthy, thanks Matt. Okay, and if there's anyone else that I missed, please put your name in there. And otherwise, I will post the recording if you guys want to refer back to this at all. It will be on our company's YouTube channel. So the next Lunch and Learn will be, it's always going to be the third Wednesday of every month. So that will be on June 15th. And then keep an eye out for the announcement for what the next topic is going to be on. All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Star.
See you guys.